A virgin woman had never kissed, building walls around her heart, convinced that love was a weakness. When the millionaire, a powerful and charming man, enters her life, he challenges her with a line that hits her deepest insecurities. "I'll be the first in everything." If this story got you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Stay tuned. Morgan Reynolds stood at the edge of the crowded ballroom, her champagne flute untouched, as she observed the glittering crowd of Manhattan's elite. The annual Barrett Foundation Charity Gala represented everything she typically avoided: excessive, wealth on display, superficial conversations, and the inevitable networking that felt more like social warfare than genuine connection. Yet here she was, dressed in a sleek emerald gown that her assistant had insisted complemented her auburn hair and pale skin perfectly. "You need to be seen," Zoe had insisted when Morgan tried to decline the invitation. Link's development doesn't hire architects who hide in their offices, no matter how brilliant they are. Morgan sighed, knowing her assistant was right. At 34, she had built Reynolds Architecture into a respected boutique firm, specializing in sustainable urban designs that had earned her critical acclaim, but not the landmark commercial projects she secretly craved. Link's development represented the opportunity to break that ceiling, a skyscraper in downtown Manhattan that would transform the skyline and her career along with it. "You're the only woman in the room not trying to be noticed," a deep voice observed from beside her. Morgan turned, momentarily startled by the intrusion into her thoughts. The man standing beside her was tall, with broad shoulders, accentuated by an impeccably tailored black suit. Dark hair swept back from a face that seemed designed to command attention, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of stormy seas. She recognized him immediately, though they'd never met. Everyone in New York's architectural community knew Ethan Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged with a slight nod, raising her glass slightly. "I didn't realize being noticed was the objective of charity events." His lips curved upward. "It's the objective of every event in this city, Ms. Reynolds, or may I call you Morgan?" A slight flutter of unease rippled through her. "You know who I am." "I make it my business to know the most talented people in every industry. Your Riverside Commons project in Boston demonstrated a vision few architects possess." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Excellence is rare. When I find it, I pay attention." Morgan maintained her composure despite the unexpected compliment. Ethan Blackwood wasn't just another real estate developer. At 40, he controlled Blackwood Enterprises, a global empire that spanned real estate, technology, and finance. His developments reshaped skylines across 3 continents, and rumors of his ruthless business tactics were as legendary as his philanthropy. Women throughout the room tracked his movements with hungry eyes, drawn to his power as much as his appearance. "You're direct, Mr. Blackwood." "Ethan," he corrected. "And yes, I find directness saves the most valuable commodity we possess." He checked the Swiss timepiece on his wrist. "Time. Is that what brings you to corner me? Efficiency?" Morgan raised an eyebrow, surprising herself with her boldness. He laughed, the sound rich and warm, contradicting his cold reputation. "Actually, I wanted to discuss your proposal for the Links project." Morgan's heart skipped. "My proposal isn't due for another 2 weeks. I've already seen your preliminary concepts. Extraordinary work. But not what Links is looking for." His eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. "I have something better to offer you." Warning bells rang in Morgan's mind. She had built her career without shortcuts or compromises, protecting herself from the industry's darker undercurrents. Men like Blackwood expected the world to bend to their will, and usually it did. "I'm perfectly content with my chances at Links," she replied coolly. "Are you? A woman competing against firms with 100-year histories and teams of 50? You're brilliant, Morgan, but the game is rigged. It always has been." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim card case, extracting a black business card. "I'm developing a property in Chicago. Revolutionary concept. I need an architect who sees possibilities others don't." Morgan didn't take the card. "You have a reputation, Mr. Blackwood." "Everyone with power does." for burning bridges and people. His expression shifted subtly, something genuine breaking through the polished veneer. Not everyone believes what they read. I form my own opinions. Then form one, he challenged, stepping closer. Have dinner with me tomorrow. Let me show you the Chicago plans. If you're not interested, I'll personally recommend Reynolds Architecture to Link's development. Morgan studied him, searching for the manipulation beneath the offer. Her instinct for self-preservation had served her well, keeping her focused on her career, rather than risking the emotional entanglements that had devastated her mother, leaving them financially and emotionally broken after her father abandoned them. She had watched that destruction as a child, vowing never to trust her heart to anyone's keeping. Just a business dinner, she clarified. For now. The honesty in his response was startling. No pretense, just acknowledgement of the electric awareness humming between them. Against her better judgment, Morgan accepted the card. I'll consider it. The Pierre, 8 o'clock. Ethan's eyes lingered on hers for a moment longer than necessary. I'm looking forward to surprising you, Morgan Reynolds. He moved away, immediately surrounded by people vying for his attention, but his gaze returned to her repeatedly throughout the evening, a silent connection that disturbed her more than their conversation. Morgan left shortly after, the night air cool against her flushed skin as she escaped into a waiting taxi. In her Soho loft apartment, Morgan kicked off her heels and poured herself a glass of wine, trying to shake the unsettling feeling Ethan Blackwood had stirred in her. She moved to her drafting table, seeking refuge in the familiar curves and lines of her work, but his words echoed in her mind. The game is rigged. It always has been. She knew it was true. Despite her talent and determination, certain doors remained closed to her. The Lynx project represented her shot at breaking through that invisible barrier. But Blackwood's offer promised a different path, one that bypassed the system entirely. Morgan pulled out her laptop and typed his name into the search bar. Articles appeared immediately, profiles in Forbes and Bloomberg, analyses of his business ventures, gossip about his private life. She scrolled through images of him with beautiful women at events, none appearing more than once. A man accustomed to getting what he wanted, then moving on. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Well, did you network like a good little architect? Morgan hesitated, then replied, Met Ethan Blackwood. He wants to discuss a Chicago project tomorrow night. The response came immediately. The Ethan Blackwood, Morgan, that's huge, but be careful. Remember Hunter. Morgan winced at the mention of her ex-boyfriend, a client who had pursued her relentlessly, only to vanish after she completed his beach house design. The professional embarrassment had stung more than the personal rejection. She closed her laptop and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. New York sparkled below, a tapestry of light and shadow. She had carved out her place in this unforgiving landscape through discipline and emotional detachment. Ethan Blackwood represented everything she avoided: intensity, complication, risk. Yet as she pressed her palm against the cool glass, Morgan couldn't deny the spark of excitement his challenge had ignited. Tomorrow night she would meet him, on her terms. Professional, detached, guarded. The walls she had built around her heart had protected her for years. No man, no matter how compelling, would breach them. But as she turned away from the window, Morgan couldn't quite silence the whisper of doubt. Something in Ethan's gaze had seen past her carefully constructed facade, recognizing a kindred spirit beneath the professional polish. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that her decision to accept that black business card had already set in motion events that would shatter the carefully controlled life she had built. Ethan Blackwood would indeed be the first in many things, the first to challenge her boundaries, the first to uncover her secrets, and perhaps the first to make her question whether the safety of isolation was worth the cost of never truly living. In the darkness of her apartment, Morgan placed the business card on her nightstand, unaware that across town Ethan Blackwood stood at his own window, looking out at the same city with a smile that held secrets she couldn't begin to imagine, secrets that would soon entangle them both in a web of desire, danger, and unexpected revelations that neither was prepared to face. The Pierre Hotel's restaurant exuded old-world opulence, crystal chandeliers, impeccable white tablecloths, and the hushed murmur of exclusive conversations. Morgan arrived precisely at 8, wearing a tailored black dress that projected professional confidence. She had spent the day immersed in work, deliberately pushing thoughts of Ethan Blackwood aside, treating this meeting as she would any potential client interaction. But Ethan Blackwood was not just any client. He rose when she approached the table, his presence commanding even in the room of New York power players. Tonight, he wore a charcoal gray suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. His eyes, those unsettling, perceptive eyes, brightened with genuine pleasure at her arrival. "You came," he said simply, pulling out her chair. "I'm glad." "Professional curiosity," Morgan replied, settling into her seat. "Chicago is an architect's dream canvas." "Is that all that brought you?" His question hung between them, laced with meaning. Morgan met his gaze directly. "Should there be another reason, Mr. Blackwood?" "Ethan," he corrected again, signaling the sommelier. "And I think there is. The same reason I specifically sought you out last night." He paused as wine was poured, waiting until they were alone again. "Recognition." "Of what?" "Kindred spirits." He raised his glass. "To those who build walls that others can't see." The observation unsettled her. Morgan sipped her wine instead of responding, uncomfortable with his perception. The sommelier returned with appetizers she didn't remember ordering, small artistic creations on pristine white plates. "Tell me about Chicago," she redirected, determined to maintain professional distance. Ethan's mouth curved slightly, acknowledging her deflection. He reached into a leather portfolio beside him and extracted several large photographs, sliding them across the table. They showed an abandoned industrial complex along Chicago's riverfront, massive brick buildings, soaring ceilings, broken windows that somehow retained a haunting beauty. "The Hawthorne Mills," he explained. "A textile factory complex from the 1920s. Abandoned for decades, the city has tried repeatedly to develop it, but the cost of restoration while meeting historical preservation requirements has defeated every attempt." Morgan studied the images. Her professional interest genuinely piqued. The structural challenges alone would be immense. Precisely why conventional developers have failed. Ethan leaned forward, his intensity magnetic. "I don't want to erase its history. I want to transform it while honoring what it was. A self-contained community, residential spaces, offices, arts facilities, public areas, all within the original structures." He continued describing his vision with passion that surprised her. This wasn't the cold business shark portrayed in media profiles. The project was ambitious, innovative, and exactly the kind of challenge Morgan had always dreamed of tackling. As he spoke, he revealed a depth of architectural knowledge that few clients possessed. "You've clearly done your research," she observed, genuinely impressed. "I studied architectural engineering before business consumed my life," he admitted. "It remains a passion." Their main courses arrived, and conversation shifted to their backgrounds. Morgan found herself sharing more than she intended. Her childhood in Boston with a single mother who worked 3 jobs after her father left, her scholarship to MIT, the struggles to establish herself in a male-dominated field. Ethan listened with unnerving focus, as if cataloging every detail. In turn, he spoke of building Blackwood Enterprises from the remains of his father's failed company, transforming a small Boston real estate firm into a global powerhouse through sheer determination and strategic risk. "My father taught me one valuable lesson through his failure," Ethan said, his expression momentarily hardening. "Trust no one completely. Verify everything." "Sounds lonely," Morgan observed before she could stop herself. His eyes met hers. "It can be. But it's kept me alive in a world where rivals would celebrate my downfall." Something vulnerable flickered across his face. "You understand isolation. Has a defense, don't you, Morgan?" The question penetrated too deeply. Morgan looked away, uncomfortable with his insight. We should discuss terms if I were to consider the Chicago project. Ethan allowed the change of subject, outlining a proposal that was startlingly generous. Complete creative control, an unprecedented budget, and a timeline that would allow for true innovation rather than rushed compromise. It was, professionally speaking, the opportunity of a lifetime. Why me? Morgan finally asked the question that had been bothering her since their first encounter. There are dozens of more established architects who would kill for this project. Because you see the world as I do. Ethan's gaze held hers. Not as it is, but as it could be. Your designs don't just occupy space, they transform it. He paused. And because I never choose the expected path, neither do you. As dinner concluded, he suggested a walk along the nearby Central Park perimeter. The spring night was mild, and Morgan agreed, unwilling to end their conversation despite her reservations. They strolled in comfortable silence for several minutes, the park's darkness to their right, the glittering city to their left. Have you decided? Ethan finally asked. About Chicago? Morgan looked up at the stars, barely visible through the city's light pollution. It's an extraordinary opportunity. But I've learned to be cautious about opportunities that seem too perfect. She stopped walking, turning to face him. Your reputation precedes you, Ethan. You're known for getting what you want, regardless of the cost to others. Instead of denying it, he stepped closer. Some reputations are earned. Others are manufactured by those who fear success they can't achieve themselves. His voice lowered. You've faced the same prejudice in your field. How many times have your achievements been attributed to luck rather than skill? How many men have taken credit for your ideas? The accuracy of his assessment stung. Morgan had fought those battles throughout her career, the dismissive comments, the stolen concepts, the constant need to prove herself where men were simply assumed competent. What do you really want from me, Ethan? Beyond Chicago? The directness of her question seemed to please him. In the streetlight's glow, his expression softened. The truth. I want to know you. The real Morgan Reynolds, not the carefully constructed professional facade you present to the world. He moved closer still, his proximity sending her pulse racing despite her determination to remain unaffected. From the moment I saw your work, I recognized something in you that mirrors something in me. We're both creating external perfection to compensate for internal scars. His hand rose, not quite touching her face. I think you feel it too, this connection. It terrifies you. Morgan stepped back, anger flaring at his presumption. You don't know me, Mr. Blackwood. I know enough, he countered, unfazed by her retreat. I know you've built your career and your life around control, because you watched your mother lose everything when your father left. I know you've avoided serious relationships because emotional vulnerability terrifies you more than professional failure. And I know that right now you're fighting an attraction that undermines every boundary you've established. The accuracy of his assessment left her speechless. How could he possibly know these things? She hadn't discussed her father in their conversation, certainly not the devastating impact of his abandonment. Who have you been talking to? She demanded, suspicion replacing attraction. No one. His expression remained calm. I recognize the pattern because I've lived it, Morgan. Different circumstances, same scars. This conversation is over. Morgan turned to leave, unnerved by his insights and her own visceral response to him. Ethan caught her wrist gently, his touch sending an unwelcome current through her body. I've made you uncomfortable, I apologize. His tone held genuine regret. Take the weekend to consider the Chicago offer. Professionally, it's everything you've worked toward. Whatever else exists between us, that's for you to decide. He released, her stepping back to give her space. My car will take you home. A sleek black sedan appeared almost immediately at the curb, as if he'd summoned it by sheer will. Before Morgan could protest, Ethan opened the door. The project details are in here, he said, handing her the leather portfolio, along with my private number. When you're ready to talk about Chicago or anything else, call me day or night. Morgan took the portfolio, their fingers brushing momentarily. That brief contact shouldn't have affected her, but it did, a jolt of awareness that she couldn't dismiss as easily as his words. "I'll be in touch about the project," she said stiffly, sliding into the car. "Morgan." Ethan leaned down, his expression serious. "Be careful who you discuss this with. Not everyone is pleased about my interest in Hawthorne Mills." Before she could question him further, he closed the door. The car pulled away, leaving him standing, alone on the sidewalk, a solitary figure that somehow commanded the vast city around him. In the back seat, Morgan tried to organize her thoughts. The Chicago project was extraordinary, career-defining. But Ethan Blackwood was a complication she hadn't anticipated. His perception unsettled her, as if he could see past the barriers she had spent years carefully constructing. The car turned onto her street, and Morgan gathered her belongings. As she reached for the portfolio, a newspaper clipping slipped out. A small article about Hawthorne Mills with a handwritten note in the margin. "Wheeler making another play. Watch your back." Morgan frowned, studying the cryptic warning. Who was Wheeler, and why would Ethan need to watch his back over an abandoned factory complex? The message hinted at conflicts beyond simple business competition. As the driver opened her door, Morgan made a decision. She would research Hawthorne Mills thoroughly before committing to anything. Ethan Blackwood might offer an unparalleled opportunity, but his intensity and the mysterious warning suggested complications she couldn't ignore. Entering her apartment, Morgan placed the portfolio on her coffee table and kicked off her heels. She poured a glass of wine and opened her laptop, typing Hawthorne Mills Chicago Wheeler into the search bar. The results were surprising. Articles about ownership disputes, community protests over development plans, and repeated mentions of Hamilton Wheeler, CEO of Wheeler Capital Partners and apparently Ethan's most bitter business rival. One headline caught her attention. "Wheeler claims Blackwood Enterprises using underhanded tactics to secure historic Chicago property." The article detailed accusations that Ethan had manipulated zoning board members to block Wheeler's previous development attempts. Morgan continued searching, uncovering a complex history of animosity between the two men that extended far beyond this single property. Their rivalry seemed personal, vicious, and potentially dangerous. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Did you arrive home safely?" Ethan, of course. How had he gotten her private number? Morgan hesitated, then replied, "Yes, researching Hawthorne Mills now. You didn't mention Hamilton Wheeler." The response came immediately. "Wheeler is the reason we need to be cautious. He doesn't fight fair. We'll discuss when you're ready." Morgan set down her phone, unease settling over her. She was being drawn into something more complicated than a simple architectural commission. Ethan Blackwood was offering her the opportunity of a lifetime, but it came with entanglements she hadn't anticipated. As she studied the portfolio materials spread across her coffee table, brilliant concept sketches, historical preservation notes, community impact assessments, Morgan couldn't deny the project's appeal. This was the kind of transformative work she had always dreamed of creating. But at what cost? And why did Ethan Blackwood, a man who could hire any architect in the world, want her specifically? His explanation about kindred spirits might contain truth, but instinct told her there was more, something he wasn't revealing. The wine glass empty beside her, Morgan made a decision. She would take the project, but on her terms, with eyes wide open to the complications that surrounded Ethan Blackwood and his world. She had spent a lifetime protecting herself from emotional entanglement. This would be no different. What Morgan couldn't know was that Ethan Blackwood had already set forces in motion that would make professional distance impossible to maintain. Their lives were now connected in ways that transcended business, drawing them into a web of secrets that neither fully understood, secrets that would soon threaten everything they had built, separately and together. 6 weeks later, Morgan stood in the cavernous main hall of Hawthorne Mills, sunlight streaming through the massive industrial windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like golden specks of possibility. The space smelled of rust, abandonment, and history, a perfect canvas for rebirth. She had been working on the project for over a month now, commuting between New York and Chicago, her initial reservations gradually giving way to creative passion. "I knew you'd understand it," Ethan's voice echoed from behind her. He approached, dressed casually in dark jeans and a grey Henley that suited him better than his usual business attire. In Chicago, away from New York's corporate battlegrounds, he seemed different, more authentic, less guarded. "It's speaking to me," Morgan admitted, gesturing to the soaring ceiling. "These trusses, they're like the skeleton of a sleeping giant. All that history just waiting to be awakened." Ethan smiled, the expression transforming his typically serious face. "That's exactly how I felt when I first walked in here." He moved beside her, close but not touching. "The preliminary designs you sent yesterday are extraordinary. You've preserved everything essential while creating something entirely new." His proximity set off the now familiar flutter in her chest. Over the past weeks, they had developed a working relationship characterized by intense creative collaboration and an unspoken personal attraction that Morgan struggled to ignore. Ethan had respected her professional boundaries, never pushing for more than she offered, but the tension between them remained a constant undercurrent. "The East Building is proving challenging," she said, deliberately steering the conversation toward work. "The foundation issues are worse than the initial survey indicated." "Show me," Ethan replied, following her lead. They spent the next hour discussing technical problems, their heads bent together over blueprints spread across a makeshift table. This was where Morgan felt safest with him, in the realm of structural challenges and design solutions, where her expertise was unquestionable and emotions had no place. "We should celebrate," Ethan announced as they finished, reviewing the plans. "Tonight, dinner at Alinea. I've arranged a private room." Morgan hesitated. "I should get back to the hotel. There's still the mechanical integration plan to finalize." "Morgan," his voice softened, "you've been working 16-hour days for weeks. One evening won't derail the project." She knew he was right. Since accepting the commission, she had thrown herself into work with an intensity that surprised even her, partly to avoid examining the growing connection between them too closely. "All right," she conceded, "but I need to stop by the hotel first." "Of course." Ethan checked his watch. "My driver can take you now. I'll handle a few calls and meet you at the restaurant at 8. The evening air carried the first hint of summer as Morgan exited the Po. Car in front of Alinea, Chicago's most acclaimed restaurant. She had changed into a deep blue silk dress, one of several new purchases made since the project began. Her wardrobe had always been practical, professional, but something about working with Ethan inspired a desire to match his effortless elegance. He was waiting inside, rising from his seat as she approached the private dining room. His eyes moved appreciatively over her, making no attempt to hide his admiration. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." Morgan accepted the compliment with more grace than usual, settling into her chair as a server poured champagne. The meal that followed was extraordinary. Course after course of culinary artistry paired with wines selected specifically for their table. Conversation flowed easily, ranging from architectural philosophy to literature to their shared love of classical music. It was the most relaxed Morgan had felt in Ethan's presence, her usual guardedness softened by excellent wine and the satisfaction of the day's progress. "I have something for you," Ethan said as dessert was served. He reached into his jacket pocket and extracted a small velvet box. Morgan tensed immediately. "Ethan, it's not what you think," he interrupted, amusement flickering in his eyes. "I'm not quite that presumptuous." He opened the box to reveal an antique key on a simple silver chain. "This is one of the original master keys to Hawthorne Mills. I found it among the historical documents. I thought the architect bringing the building back to life should have it." Relieved and unexpectedly touched, Morgan lifted the key from its velvet bed. It was heavy, intricate, beautiful in its utilitarian design. "This is perfect. Thank you." Ethan took it from her hands, moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin, lingering a moment longer than necessary. When he returned to his seat, his expression had changed, becoming more serious. "There's something we need to discuss," he said. "Something I should have told you earlier about Hawthorne Mills." The shift in his tone alarmed her. "What is it?" Ethan took a slow breath. Hamilton Wheeler's interest in the property isn't purely business. The original mill was owned by his great-grandfather before my grandfather acquired it in the 1950s. Wheeler believes it was taken from his family through manipulation and fraud. Was it? No, it was a legitimate business transaction, but Wheeler has convinced himself otherwise. Ethan's expression darkened. "Our families have a complicated history, one that predates me. You should have told me this before I accepted." "The commission," Morgan said, pushing her dessert aside. "Would it have changed your decision?" "It would have informed it," she countered. "I don't appreciate being kept in the dark about factors that could impact the project." "You're right," he met her gaze directly. "I should have been more forthcoming. The truth is, I didn't want to burden you with what essentially amounts to a family feud that should have died decades ago." "Is that all it is? Because the security measures at the site suggest otherwise." Morgan had noticed the armed guards, the sophisticated surveillance system, the rigorous access protocols that seemed excessive even for a valuable development project. Ethan's expression became guarded. "Wheeler has attempted to interfere with several of my projects in the past. The security is a precaution." "Interfered how?" Morgan pressed, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. "Industrial espionage, intimidation of contractors, once a suspicious fire at a development site in Boston." His jaw tightened. "Wheeler believes in winning at any cost." The revelation was disturbing. "And you don't?" "I believe in winning fairly," Ethan replied. "But I'm not naive about what's at stake." Morgan studied him, searching for deception in his steady gaze and finding none. Yet instinct told her there were still layers he wasn't revealing. "Is there anything else I should know?" For a moment Ethan seemed to consider telling her something more, then shook his head. "Nothing that affects the project or your safety. I promise you that." Their evening concluded with a palpable tension that hadn't existed before. In the car back to her hotel, Morgan turned the key pendant between her fingers, contemplating what Ethan had shared and what he might still be hiding. The project had grown more complicated, but she remained committed. Hawthorne Mills represented a creative challenge she couldn't walk away from, even with the added complexity of the Blackwood-Wheeler feud. At her hotel door, Ethan maintained a respectful distance. "I have to return to New York tomorrow morning. Unavoidable board meetings. Will you be all right here for a few days without me?" "I managed an architectural firm for years before we met, Ethan," Morgan replied dryly. "I think I can handle a few days of independent work." He smiled, the tension between them momentarily lightening. "Of course you can, that's never been in question." His expression sobered. "Just be aware of your surroundings. Wheeler has eyes everywhere." "You're making me nervous now." "That's not my intention." Ethan hesitated, then stepped closer, his hand rising to touch the key at her throat. "I just need you to be safe." The concern in his voice seemed genuine, stirring emotions Morgan had been carefully suppressing. For weeks they had maintained professional boundaries, despite the growing attraction between them. Now, with his face inches from hers, those boundaries felt paper-thin. Before she could decide how to respond, Ethan's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression immediately shifting to one of controlled alarm. "I need to take this. Good night, Morgan. We'll talk tomorrow." He was gone before she could reply, already engaged in an intense conversation as he strode toward the elevator. Morgan entered her suite, unsettled by both his abrupt departure and the information he had shared about the Wheeler feud. She kicked off her heels and opened her laptop, determined to learn more about this rivalry that was now entangling her project. Hours later, she had pieced together a troubling history. The Blackwood and Wheeler families had been business rivals for generations, their competition occasionally veering into questionable territory on both sides. Lawsuits, counter-lawsuits, hostile takeovers, and public accusations created a tapestry of animosity spanning decades. Most disturbing were several suspicious incidents surrounding disputed properties, accidents, unexplained fires, even allegations of threatened violence that never led to formal charges. Morgan closed her laptop, deeply disturbed. The Hawthorne Mills project suddenly felt less like an architectural opportunity and more like a battlefield in a war she hadn't signed up to fight. And Ethan, despite his apparent transparency tonight, clearly wasn't telling her everything. Her phone chimed with a text. Landed safely in New York. Sorry about the abrupt departure. Call me tomorrow with any concerns. Morgan didn't reply immediately. Instead, she moved to the window, gazing out at Chicago's glittering skyline. She had come to love this city over the past weeks, finding inspiration in its architectural heritage and vibrant energy. The Hawthorne Mills project could be her masterpiece, a career-defining achievement that would establish her among the architectural elite. But at what cost? And could she trust Ethan Blackwood to be honest about the risks involved? Her reflections were interrupted by a knock at her door. Checking the peephole, she saw a hotel staff member with an envelope. Delivery for Ms. Reynolds. Morgan accepted the envelope with a quick thanks and returned to her living area. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery with a handwritten note. Ms. Reynolds, I believe we have mutual interests regarding Hawthorne Mills. Information. How you should be aware of before proceeding further. Breakfast tomorrow, 9 a.m., 16 restaurant. No need to confirm. I'll be waiting. Hamilton Wheeler. Morgan stared at the note, shock giving way to uneasy curiosity. How had Wheeler known where she was staying? And what information could he possibly have that she needed to know? Common sense suggested ignoring the invitation. Ethan would certainly advise against meeting his rival, yet Morgan couldn't dismiss the nagging feeling that she was only seeing half the picture of the Blackwood-Wheeler conflict. As an architect, she knew that understanding the complete structural situation was essential before moving forward with any design. After a moment's hesitation, she texted Ethan, "Arrived safely at the hotel. We'll call tomorrow." She deliberately omitted mention of Wheeler's invitation, unwilling to make a decision under Ethan's influence. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind cycling through possibilities. By morning, she had made her decision. She would meet Wheeler, not to betray Ethan's trust, but to gather information that would allow her to make fully informed choices about her involvement in the project. Morgan dressed carefully in a structured grey suit that projected professional confidence, adding the key pendant after a moment's hesitation. Whatever Wheeler's agenda might be, she would approach the meeting as a neutral professional gathering facts, not taking sides in a feud she still didn't fully understand. 16 Restaurant occupied the 16th floor of Trump Tower, offering panoramic views of Chicago's riverfront. Morgan arrived precisely at 9, scanning the elegant space until her gaze landed on a distinguished man in his early 60s, sitting alone by the window. Though they had never met, she recognized Hamilton Wheeler from her research. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the confident bearing of old money and entrenched power. He rose as she approached, his smile practiced but his eyes sharp and assessing. "Ms. Reynolds," he greeted, extending his hand. "Hamilton Wheeler. Thank you for joining me." "Mr. Wheeler." Morgan kept her voice neutral as they shook hands. "I must admit your invitation was unexpected. Please sit." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I've taken the liberty of ordering coffee." Morgan settled into the chair, maintaining a composed exterior despite her inner tension. "Your note mentioned information about Hawthorne Mills that I should be aware of." Wheeler studied her for a moment, his gaze lingering briefly on the key pendant at her throat before returning to her face. "Direct. I appreciate that quality." He sipped his coffee before continuing. "How much has Ethan told you about the history of our families?" "He mentioned a long-standing business rivalry," Morgan replied carefully, "and your specific interest in Hawthorne Mills." Wheeler laughed softly, the sound devoid of humor. "A business rivalry. How diplomatic of him." His expression hardened. "Ms. Reynolds, you've aligned yourself with a man whose family built their fortune by dismantling mine." "I'm an architect, Mr. Wheeler, not a historian. I'm here to redesign a building, not take sides in your personal conflict. There's no neutrality in this situation, Wheeler said, leaning forward, and that building represents far more than just another development opportunity. He reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a folded document, placing it on the table. This is a copy of my grandfather's correspondence from 1954, describing how Joseph Blackwood systematically bankrupted his business, then acquired Hawthorne Mills at a fraction of its value. Morgan didn't touch the document. With all due respect, that was 70 years ago. The methods have evolved, but the Blackwood approach hasn't changed. Wheeler's voice remained calm, but his eyes burned with long-harbored resentment. Ethan is his grandfather's true heir in every sense. He appears to operate legitimately, but scratch the surface, and you'll find the same ruthless tactics. Do you have evidence of this? Morgan challenged. Would I be meeting you if I didn't? Wheeler extracted another document from his briefcase. 3 years ago, Blackwood Enterprises acquired a controlling interest in Meridian Technologies, a company that happened to hold patents critical to my largest development project. Within months, Meridian raised licensing fees exclusively for Wheeler Capital Partners, effectively killing our project. Morgan frowned. That's aggressive business, but not illegal. Perhaps. Wheeler slid the document toward her. But what? About this? Financial records showing substantial payments from a Blackwood subsidiary to the Chicago zoning commissioner, who repeatedly rejected my proposals for Hawthorne Mills over technical concerns that magically disappeared. When Ethan submitted virtually identical plans, this information was more troubling. Morgan reluctantly examined the document, her architectural training allowing her to quickly assess the technical specifications referenced. The similarities between Wheeler's rejected plans and Ethan's approved proposal were indeed striking. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked finally. "Because you deserve to know what and who you're involved with." Wheeler's expression softened slightly. "You have an exceptional reputation, Ms. Reynolds. Your integrity is as renowned as your talent. I suspect Ethan hasn't been fully transparent about the nature of this project or the methods he's using to secure it." Morgan maintained her composure, though internally she was troubled by Wheeler's revelations. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "That you reconsider your association with this project." Wheeler leaned back, studying her reaction. "Or at minimum that you ask Ethan the hard questions you're currently avoiding. Why you? Why now? What's his real interest in?" "Hawthorne Mills?" The questions echoed her own unvoiced concerns. Morgan had been so captivated by the creative opportunity that she had pushed aside her instinctive caution about Ethan's intense interest in both her and the project. "And if I were to walk away," she probed, "would you be waiting with an alternative offer?" Wheeler smiled, apparently pleased by her perception. "I won't insult your intelligence by pretending this meeting is purely altruistic. Yes, I would very much like to see Hawthorne Mills restored by an architect of your caliber, but under my company's direction, honoring my family's legacy. So I should simply switch allegiances, trading one side of this feud for another. I'm offering you transparency," Wheeler countered, "and a chance to create something magnificent without the shadow of questionable ethics hanging over it." Morgan rose from her seat, gathering her belongings. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Wheeler, but I make my own assessments. I'll take what you've shared under advisement." Wheeler stood as well, handing her his business card. "When you're ready to continue this conversation, and I believe you will be, call me directly. Day or night?" The echo of Ethan's identical words sent a chill through Morgan. She left the restaurant with her mind in turmoil, Wheeler's documents tucked into her bag alongside Ethan's project files. Outside, she paused on the riverwalk, gazing across at Hawthorne Mills in the distance, its massive brick presence now complicated by layers of history and conflict she hadn't fully appreciated. Her phone vibrated with a text from Ethan. "Meeting running late. Will call this evening. How's the East Wing progressing?" Morgan stared at the message, suddenly uncertain about everything. The project, Ethan, Wheeler, her own judgment, all were now cast in shadows of doubt. She had built her career on clarity of vision and purpose. Now that clarity was obscured by revelations that suggested she was merely a pawn in a game much larger and darker than architectural innovation. She put her phone away without responding, needing time to process what she had learned before confronting Ethan. Instead, she headed directly to Hawthorne Mills, seeking refuge in the concrete reality of the structure itself. Within those walls, with blueprints spread before her and design challenges to solve, she could temporarily set aside the human complications that threatened to overwhelm her. But as Morgan worked through the afternoon, Wheeler's questions persisted. Why had Ethan sought her out specifically? What wasn't he telling her about his history with Wheeler and the true significance of Hawthorne Mills? And most troubling, what would happen when she finally demanded the complete truth? As sunset painted the massive windows with amber light, Morgan reached a decision. She would continue the project, but with eyes wide open. Ethan Blackwood had promised to be the first in everything, the first to challenge her boundaries, the first to earn her trust. Now, he would be the first to face her uncompromising demand for absolute honesty, regardless of the consequences for their professional relationship or the undeniable connection growing between them. What Morgan couldn't know was that forces had already been set in motion that would make such honesty impossible, forces that would soon reveal connections between her own past and the Blackwood-Wheeler feud that would shatter every boundary she had carefully constructed around her heart and her life. The Manhattan skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan's penthouse office, the city transformed into a tapestry of light against the evening darkness. Morgan stood with her back to the door, studying the meticulous architectural model of Hawthorne Mills that dominated the conference table. Her design brought to life in miniature, exquisite in its detail and vision. "They completed it yesterday," Ethan's voice came from behind her. "I wanted it to be a surprise." Morgan didn't turn around immediately. She had flown back to New York that morning, spending the 3 days since her meeting with Wheeler researching deeper into the Blackwood-Wheeler history and wrestling with her conflicting emotions. Now she needed to maintain composure for the conversation ahead. "It's beautiful," she acknowledged, finally facing him. The fabricators captured every nuance. Ethan approached slowly, his usual confidence tempered by something she hadn't seen before, uncertainty. He had sensed the shift in her demeanor from the moment she arrived, maintaining a careful professional distance. "Morgan, what's wrong? You've been distant since Chicago." She met his gaze directly. "I met with Hamilton Wheeler." The statement hung between them, heavy with implication. Ethan's expression tightened, but he didn't appear surprised. "I know, he called to inform me, quite pleased. With himself." "You knew and didn't say anything?" "I was waiting for you to tell me." Ethan moved to the window, his silhouette sharp against the city lights. "What did he say that's troubled you so deeply?" "He showed me documentation of payments to Chicago officials who approved your Hawthorne Mills proposal after rejecting his nearly identical plans." Morgan kept her voice steady, professional. "He detailed a pattern of behavior, suggesting you use methods that cross ethical, possibly legal lines." Ethan turned back to her, his face unreadable. "And you believe him?" "I don't know what to believe anymore." Morgan approached the model, running her finger along the miniature facade. "What I do know is that you haven't been completely honest with me about this project or why you sought me out specifically." The silence stretched between them, tension building until Ethan finally nodded. "You're right, there are things I haven't told you." He moved to his desk, unlocking a drawer to extract a thick folder. "But not for the reasons Wheeler implied." He placed the folder on the table beside the model. "Everything is here, the complete history of Hawthorne Mills, the Wheeler family's claims, and the documentation proving my grandfather acquired the property legally. Yes, I've made payments to Chicago officials. Campaign contributions, all properly disclosed and legal. Wheeler conveniently omitted that context." Morgan opened the folder, scanning documents that indeed supported Ethan's assertions. But the most interesting item was a newspaper clipping from 1954 with a photograph of Hawthorne Mills workers celebrating the sale to Blackwood Enterprises. A familiar face in the crowd caught her attention, a young woman standing slightly apart, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. This woman, Morgan said, pointing to the figure. Who is she? Ethan's expression softened. Elizabeth Reynolds, your grandmother. The revelation struck Morgan like a physical blow. What? That's impossible. My grandmother never mentioned any connection to Chicago or Hawthorne Mills. She wouldn't have. Ethan's voice was gentle now. Elizabeth was Wheeler Textile's accountant. She discovered financial irregularities. Harold Wheeler had been embezzling from his own company, driving it toward bankruptcy. When she threatened to expose him, he fired her and attempted to destroy her reputation. Morgan stared at the photograph, searching for resemblance to the grandmother she had known, a quiet, determined woman who had helped raise her after her father left. My grandmother never spoke of this. Joseph Blackwood, my grandfather, believed her allegations and hired investigators who uncovered Harold Wheeler's fraud. The sale of Hawthorne Mills wasn't theft. It was the consequence of Wheeler's own criminal actions. Ethan moved closer. After the sale, my grandfather offered Elizabeth a position at Blackwood Enterprises' Boston office, where she met your grandfather. The pieces started falling into place. Her grandmother's surprising knowledge of financial matters, her insistence that Morgan pursue education and independence above all else. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Would you have believed me, or would you have assumed I was manipulating you? Ethan's question wasn't accusatory, merely pragmatic. I needed you to form your own impressions of the project, of me, without that complication. Morgan turned away, processing this new information that connected her family to the Blackwood-Wheeler feud in ways she never could have imagined. How long have you known about my grandmother's involvement? I discovered it 5 years ago while researching Hawthorne Mills' history. When I later saw your architectural work, I recognized the same bold vision Elizabeth showed in standing up to Wheeler. Ethan hesitated. I sought you out because you're brilliant, Morgan. Your connection to this history is significant to me personally, but it's your talent I need for Hawthorne Mills. Morgan moved back to the model, studying her design with new eyes. The project had taken on dimensions she never anticipated, personal, historical, emotional. Wheeler believes you're using me. Wheeler would say anything to undermine this project. Ethan's voice hardened. He's not fighting for family honor. He's fighting to erase the evidence of his grandfather's crimes. Hawthorne Mills represents his family's disgrace. And what does it represent to you? Ethan was silent for a long moment. Redemption, he finally said. Not for my grandfather. He did nothing wrong. For me. Morgan turned to face him, surprised by the vulnerability in his admission. What do you mean? 10 years ago, I made decisions I'm not proud of. Business choices that prioritized profit over people. His expression was haunted by genuine regret. Hawthorne Mills is my chance to create something lasting and positive, to transform a symbol of industrial exploitation into a community that honors history while creating a humane future. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. For all his power and wealth, Ethan Blackwood was revealing himself as a man seeking meaning beyond business success, a man capable of reflection and growth. Why me? Morgan asked again, the question that had haunted her since their first meeting. Of all the architects in the world, why me? Ethan moved toward her slowly, stopping just short of touching her. Because from the moment I saw your work, I recognized a kindred spirit, someone who builds beautiful structures as a way of creating the order and harmony that life denied you. His voice lowered. Someone who understands that the most magnificent creations often come from our deepest wounds. The truth of his words resonated painfully. Morgan had indeed channeled her childhood pain into architectural precision, creating perfect structures to compensate for the broken foundation of her early life. That Ethan had seen her, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Wheeler will continue fighting this project, she said, redirecting to practical concerns. He seems determined to destroy you. Let him try. Ethan's confidence returned. I have something he doesn't. What's that? You. The simple declaration carried weight beyond the professional context. Your vision, your integrity, and the truth about what really happened at Hawthorne Mills. Morgan moved to the windows, gazing out at the city below. The revelations of the past hour had transformed her understanding of everything: the project, her family history, Ethan himself. She felt simultaneously unmoored and more connected than ever before. "There's something else you should know," Ethan said, joining her at the window. "Wheeler has been investigating you, trying to find leverage. He knows about your father leaving, your mother's subsequent struggles. He'll use that information if he thinks it will drive a wedge between us." Anger flared within her. "My personal history isn't his to weaponize." "No," Ethan agreed, "it isn't. But Wheeler doesn't respect boundaries, personal or professional." Morgan turned to face him. "Is that why you've been so concerned about security? You were protecting me as much as the project." Ethan didn't deny it. "Wheeler has used intimidation tactics before. I wanted to ensure you weren't exposed to that." The protective impulse should have triggered Morgan's independence reflex, her lifelong determination to stand alone, to need no one. Instead, she found herself touched by his concern, seeing it not as an attempt to control, but as a genuine desire to shield her from unnecessary pain. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on you." Ethan's gaze held hers. "The project continues if you want it to. I can assign another architect if you prefer distance from this situation, or we face whatever comes next together, professionally and personally." He didn't move closer, respecting the space between them. "I meant what I said that first night, Morgan. I want to be the first in everything for you, the first to earn your trust completely, the first to know the woman behind the walls you've built. But only if you choose that." The proposition hung between them, not a demand but an invitation. For Morgan, it represented everything she had spent her life avoiding: vulnerability, dependence, the risk of profound loss. Yet in this moment, those fears seemed smaller than the possibility of what she might find beyond them. "Wheeler said something that's been bothering me," she admitted. "He asked why now, why Hawthorne Mills has suddenly become so important to you." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "That's a fair question." He moved to his desk, returning with a medical report that he handed to her. "I was diagnosed with a heart condition last year. Not immediately life-threatening, but a reminder that time isn't unlimited. It forced me to evaluate what matters, what legacy I want to leave beyond accumulating wealth and power." Morgan scanned the report, her throat tightening at the clinical description of his condition. This wasn't manipulation. This was Ethan at his most vulnerable, sharing a truth that powerful men typically concealed at all costs. "You couldn't have known about my connection to Elizabeth when you were first diagnosed," she observed. "No? That was synchronicity, or fate, if you believe in such things." Ethan smiled slightly. "When I discovered the connection later, it felt meaningful in ways I can't fully explain." Morgan placed the report on his desk, turning back to the architectural model that represented their shared vision. Her hand moved instinctively to the key pendant at her throat, a symbol that now carried deeper significance. This project, this building, connected her to her own history in ways she had never imagined. Walking away from it would mean denying part of herself. And walking away from Ethan? She studied him in the dim light, seeing beyond the powerful businessman to the man beneath. Complicated, flawed, but authentic in ways that resonated with her own hidden depths. The attraction between them had been immediate and powerful, but this connection went deeper, touching places in her soul she had kept walled off for decades. "I want to continue. The project," she said finally. Relief crossed his features. "And us?" Morgan took a deep breath, making the choice that terrified her most. "That too." Ethan moved toward her slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. When she remained still, he reached for her hand, the simple contact sending electricity through her body. "I promise to be the first in everything," he said softly. "Let me be the first man you trust with your heart completely." "I'm not sure I know how," Morgan admitted, vulnerability replacing her usual guardedness. "We'll learn together." His fingers traced her cheek with gentle reverence. "I've spent my life conquering and acquiring. You're teaching me how to cherish instead." As his lips met hers, Morgan felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble, not in defeat, but in liberation. This kiss wasn't just physical, it was a promise, a beginning, a step into territory she had never dared explore. When they finally parted, Ethan's expression was transformed by a joy she had never seen in him before. "I should warn you," he said, his voice tender with emotion, "that I don't approach anything half-heartedly. Once you let me in, Morgan Reynolds, I intend to stay." "Is that a threat or a promise?" she asked, her own smile reflecting his. "Both." His arms encircled her, strong and sure. "Wheeler will still come after the project, after us. It won't be easy." "Nothing worthwhile ever is." Morgan rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, the heart that medical report had declared compromised. Life offered no guarantees, no certainty. Perhaps that was the lesson she had been avoiding all these years. Outside, a summer storm broke over Manhattan, rain lashing against the windows as lightning illuminated the skyline. Morgan thought of Hawthorne Mills waiting in Chicago, a structure born of conflict and deception, now poised for transformation through their shared vision. It seemed an apt metaphor for what was happening between them, something beautiful emerging from complicated origins. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "That you were right," Morgan replied, looking up at him. "How you were the first person to see past my defenses, the first to make me want to risk everything I've protected." His expression grew serious. "I promise you won't regret it." 6 months later, Morgan stood in the central atrium of Hawthorne Mills as workers installed the massive skylight that would flood the space with natural light. The renovation was progressing ahead of schedule, her vision taking physical form day by day. The building that had once symbolized industrial power was becoming a vibrant community hub with affordable housing, art spaces, and technology incubators, sharing the historic structure. Wheeler had indeed continued his opposition, launching lawsuits and media campaigns designed to derail the project. But each attack had been met with transparency and truth, the documented history of his grandfather's, fraud Elizabeth Reynolds' role in exposing it, and the legitimate business transactions that had followed. Public opinion had shifted decisively against Wheeler Capital Partners, forcing Hamilton Wheeler to retreat from his very public vendetta. "Impressive," Ethan's voice echoed as he approached across the vast space. He had flown in from New York that morning, having spent the past week dealing with the financial restructuring that had become necessary after Wheeler's latest attempt to undermine Blackwood Enterprises. "You've transformed this place." "We have," Morgan corrected, accepting his embrace. The past months had deepened their connection in ways she never could have anticipated, teaching her that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but strength of a different kind. Ethan had kept his promise, becoming the first man she trusted completely with her heart, her fears, her dreams. His medical treatment was progressing well, new therapies offering hope for complete recovery. But the diagnosis had changed them both, instilling a sense of urgency about living fully rather than safely. Morgan had finally understood that her grandmother's legacy wasn't just financial prudence, but courage, the courage to stand for truth, even when it was dangerous to risk security for principle. Wheeler's final appeal was denied this morning, Ethan informed her, satisfaction evident in his tone. "It's officially over. Hawthorne Mills is secure." Morgan smiled, relief washing through her. "Just in time for the opening next month." Perfect timing for another milestone as well. Ethan reached into his pocket, extracting a small, velvet box that immediately sent her heart racing. "I told you once that I would be the first in everything for you, Morgan. Let me be the last as well." He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring set in platinum, the exact shade of green she had worn the night they met. "Marry me," he said simply. "Build a life with me that's as beautiful and strong as the structures you create." Tears, filled Morgan's eyes as she looked from the ring to the man offering it, the man who had challenged every boundary, every fear, every limitation she had placed on herself. The man who had taught her that the greatest architectural achievement wasn't a building, but a life fully lived. "Yes," she whispered, her voice echoing in the soaring space they had reclaimed together. As Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, sunlight broke through the newly installed skylight, illuminating them in a perfect circle of golden light. Morgan looked up at the structure surrounding them, a testament to transformation, to history honored but not imprisoned by, to the possibility of building something magnificent from complicated foundations, just like love, just like them. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Morgan and Ethan through the halls of Hawthorne Mills has touched your hearts. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful structures are built from our deepest wounds, and that true connection requires the courage to tear down the walls we've built around our hearts. For more emotional journeys like this one, we've created a special playlist of equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this tale of architectural passion and personal transformation, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore life's complexities.